Red Bull's 2026 power unit was supposed to be revolutionary, but a hidden flaw just got exposed by the FIA's new rulebook. Insider data reveals a dangerous mismatch between Red Bull's hybrid energy deployment system and the mandatory electric power balance, and it's already failing full race simulations. If they don't fix this flaw fast, the car could breach thermal safety limits on track or get ruled non-compliant before the first Grand Prix even starts. Subscribe now, because the team everyone thought would dominate 2026 might not even make it out of preseason testing. When the FIA released the full details of the 2026 power unit regulations, most teams saw a complex challenge. Red Bull saw an opportunity. The new rules demanded a dramatic shift. 50% of a car's total power output must come from electric energy, while the MGUK, the kinetic energy recovery system, would deliver triple the power it does today. Red Bull, now working independently with Ford, designed their entire powertrain around maximizing these new hybrid targets from day one. But that bold strategy has a catch, and it's just been exposed. According to internal documentation leaked from Red Bull powertrains, the system's current hybrid mapping doesn't comply cleanly with the new deployment windows required by the FIA. Their setup delivers electric energy too aggressively during early acceleration, and not enough in sustained zones, putting them at odds with the energy distribution profile the regulations are built around. And if they don't meet the deployment compliance envelope in both lab and track testing, the car cannot be homologated. What's worse, the problem wasn't spotted during early development phases. It only surfaced once Red Bull ran full race simulations under FIA-imposed energy budgets, with all environmental variables modeled, including altitude, humidity, and tire degradation. That's when their system began falling out of the electric versus combustion power balance window, sometimes by as much as 4%. In a sport where margins are measured in thousandths of a second, 4% is catastrophic. This goes beyond raw pace. The FIA's new rules aren't just about speed, they're about sustainability and control. The regulations force teams to not only use electric energy, but to use it predictably, efficiently, and within a tight range per lap. Red Bull's system, built for maximum aggression and top-end delivery, now appears to be fundamentally misaligned with that philosophy. In effect, they built a weapon for a war the FIA no longer wants teams to fight. One senior source familiar with the data said Red Bull's MGUK overperforms in the wrong places. That means the car delivers bursts of electric power too early in corner exits, draining energy stores that are needed later in the lap. As a result, the power unit can't maintain consistent energy distribution, triggering fallback modes that reduce boost and disrupt drivability. From the driver's perspective, that's a nightmare. You expect power out of turn 9, and suddenly there's nothing. This regulatory mismatch is creating massive tension inside Milton Keynes. Red Bull's engineers are now racing to remap the hybrid strategy without touching hardware, because any physical changes would delay the homologation timeline and require FIA reapproval. That's nearly impossible at this point in development. But software fixes can only go so far, and rival teams, particularly Mercedes and Ferrari, are reportedly already testing compliance systems with more balanced output. The stakes couldn't be higher. Red Bull and Ford built their 2026 project to lead a new engine era. But now, buried in thousands of lines of hybrid code, lies a critical flaw that the rulebook just exposed, a flaw that could leave them vulnerable not only to disqualification, but to being outperformed by more conservative, compliant rivals. What looked like an advantage has become a potential disaster. The first major technical red flag emerged during Red Bull's virtual compliance testing, when their 2026 power unit failed to meet the FIA's new electrical deployment efficiency ratio. Under the new rules, the FIA requires teams to deliver a stable electric-to-combustion ratio over each lap, not just across a race average. Red Bull's system, however, was found to swing wildly between electric peaks and troughs, particularly during acceleration zones. This dynamic behavior is a direct result of their energy push philosophy, designed for raw pace, not regulatory compliance. Compounding the issue is how Red Bull structured its energy harvesting logic. Their MGUK is tuned to prioritize rapid charge recovery under braking, which sounds ideal. But the problem is that this regeneration comes in short, violent bursts far too intense for the battery's thermal management system to disperse quickly. This overloads the internal cell banks, particularly during race stints with frequent braking zones, triggering emergency cooling limits. Once activated, these limits silently reduce performance without any mechanical fault, a nightmare scenario for race strategists. According to data sourced from a closed-door simulator session, Red Bull's battery pack reached critical heat saturation after just 12 laps at a simulated full race pace around Baku. That's barely a third of race distance. Once the system hit the threshold, energy output dropped by over 20% on average for the remaining laps. These are not hypothetical projections. The simulation matched real driver inputs, track temperature profiles, and expected drag levels under the 2026 aero regulations. The result? A car that looked fast on paper, but couldn't sustain its own power. Even more troubling is the lack of thermal consistency between different modules. Ford's battery division designed the energy store using a cell format optimized for weight and packaging, but not for passive airflow. This means certain modules heat faster than others, leading to internal imbalances. The FIA has strict guidelines around electrical safety, and uneven heating across modules is a major warning sign. Red Bull may have to completely revise its cell layout, a move that would delay the car's readiness and force fresh FIA inspections. The Red Bull engineering team also flagged anomalies in deployment timing. Their control software, designed to anticipate optimal release zones for electric boost, is too aggressive in circuits with variable traction. In wet conditions, or at high-altitude circuits like Mexico City, the power delivery leads to instability on exit and forces drivers to lift, essentially throwing away speed that the engine should be giving them. This is not only a performance issue, but a driver confidence issue. No driver wants to guess when their hybrid power will kick in, especially not during a title fight. Sources suggest that Red Bull's real challenge now is software compliance under variable race scenarios. The FIA requires all energy deployment logic to function within legal boundaries across the full range of track temperatures, altitudes, and driver modes. That includes safety car periods, mixed weather stints, and DRS zones. Red Bull's system, however, seems tailored for clean air performance and becomes erratic when outside of optimal conditions. This opens them up not just to underperformance, but to post-race investigations or penalties if their output strays beyond allowed thresholds. Perhaps the most unexpected twist in all of this is how rival teams found out. According to insiders, several manufacturers, including Mercedes and Audi, flagged concerns about Red Bull's deployment model during FIA technical working group meetings. Using telemetry comparison tools and simulation benchmarks shared in development sessions, they noticed Red Bull's projected electrical usage per lap was far more aggressive than theirs and alarmingly close to the regulatory ceiling. That's when questions started getting asked, and data started getting leaked. Inside Red Bull's power unit facility at Milton Keynes, the atmosphere has shifted from confident innovation to controlled crisis management. Engineers are now locked in a full redesign of the car's hybrid deployment logic, a crucial software layer that determines how electric energy is used lap by lap. The problem is that this isn't just about trimming outputs, it's about rewriting the behavioral DNA of the power unit, ensuring that it stays within FIA limits while still delivering the aggressive pace Red Bull is known for. It's a balancing act between raw power and legal compliance. The first solution being tested is a multi-mode deployment map, allowing the car to adapt energy usage to specific circuit profiles, temperature conditions, and even driver inputs in real time. But that introduces latency and unpredictability. Verstappen, for example, relies on consistent torque delivery when exiting low-speed corners. If the car suddenly pulls back boost because the software detects a potential rule breach, the handling becomes inconsistent, and that erodes both performance and driver confidence over a race distance. At the hardware level, Red Bull's electrical engineering team is now exploring changes to the battery's thermal layering, including a modular cell arrangement that could isolate overheating sectors instead of dragging the entire system into shutdown. However, implementing this requires structural changes to the battery housing, changes that were not part of the initial FIA homologation. That brings an additional layer of regulatory risk. Any hardware revision must be reported, justified, and reapproved, and that can only happen during narrow FIA technical windows. Ford's American-based EV division has also become more directly involved. Their thermal materials research team is fast-tracking a graphene-infused cooling substrate that could be inserted between the battery cell layers. In theory, this would improve heat dispersion without adding bulk or compromising packaging. But it's still untested in motorsport at this intensity. Red Bull is gambling on a breakthrough that may only reveal its true strengths or failures under live racing pressure. And in F1, a gamble without data is just a risk waiting to explode. Meanwhile, Red Bull's strategy group is modeling alternative race deployment profiles, essentially using less electric power earlier in the lap to build a thermal buffer for later. But that means losing time on straights and during critical overtakes. Worse, these deployment profiles would make the car appear slower during qualifying, potentially compromising grid position. In a midfield that's tightening every season, a few tenths lost in Q3 can turn a front row start into a P7 disappointment. A more drastic option has been floated internally, delaying the 2026 car's production freeze and asking the FIA for special dispensation to homologate late. This would give Red Bull time to finalize software and cooling solutions without locking themselves into a flawed architecture. But that opens a political minefield. Other teams would likely protest, arguing that Red Bull is exploiting its engine constructor status to bypass timelines. The FIA has already indicated it wants to avoid any exceptions, and Ford's public brand reputation hangs in the balance. This is no longer just a technical problem, it's an existential one. Red Bull committed to becoming a full works team to control their destiny in 2026 and beyond. But the price of independence is total accountability. Every solution, every failure, every miscalculation now sits directly on their shoulders. As the countdown to the 2026 season continues, they're not just racing to fix a flaw. They're racing to protect their legacy and to prove that their engine gamble wasn't a strategic mistake.